everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Spirit Talks. I am your host, the Hermit Tarot, but you can call me Lorraine. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about burnout and the pressures and expectations of long-term success. Before we get into it, I do want to pay my respects to the traditional landowners. We're on the border in Cairns, so we're kind of between the Yidinji tribe and the Jabaganji tribe. So I'm just going to pay respects to those two tribes, and I also want to pay respect to my stepfather's tribe, the Mullumbada Yidinji tribe, just because you got to represent. Let's get into it. I don't have any questions to answer from the last podcast because, to be honest with you, I have not checked those feedback forms. My intention was to just kind of let them build and hopefully dedicate a whole episode to answering feedback. But if you do want to submit questions, please send them through because I do still read them, even though they don't necessarily get answered in every podcast episode. I am going to let them accumulate and they will get answered eventually. If it's that desperate of a question, I will probably even reach out to you specifically. So we'll see what happens. But a massive thank you to you for tuning in again. Let's basically get into it. So the way that we kind of came up with today's podcast topic, I recently had my brother move back up to Cairns with me, and he's helping me with this whole elaborate setup today. So if you're noticing the alternating camera angles, that is Xander Digital. And we were trying to figure out, like, what should we do? How should we cover the next episode? Because it is just going to be me. And we've got some exciting things to come, but I did just want to have a more intimate episode as our next one, where we're talking about things that I can personally relate to without having to add in other guests, because I know that this is a topic that you guys can all relate to. I'm pretty transparent about burnout. I do address it a lot between us on Instagram, on my stories, and even recently on my community posts on the main channel. I've had to address it because I've had to take so much time off in the past. So I kind of wanted to approach this with a lot of personal stories, and I hope that you can relate to where we're going. But as always, let's make it a conversation. Hit me up in my DMs and let me know how this relates to you too. So getting onto this topic, I was sitting in my room with my amazing brother/producer, Xander Digital, and we started shuffling tarot cards. I was like, Spirit, what the heck should I talk about? How are we going to approach the next Spirit Talks episode in general? And burnout came out way too fast. And I think, like, for me personally, the expectations of starting a new year are heavily filled with optimism and the idea that we have the whole 12 months to achieve many fantastic, like, wonderful, out of this world ideas. And I think where we get kind of wrapped up in the idea of the end or the goal becoming real is getting a little bit disconnected from our physical limitations, from where our vessel needs rest, or from where we just need to recharge and take mental health breaks. And I think that in some ways a lot of us already do that. For me personally, I've just learned to be more selfish with my time. We talk about that a lot on the channel as well. And centering that language around self-care instead of selfish. So the first thing that I really wanted to talk about is the pressures of long-term success. And if you are someone like me, I have a lot of big plans. I don't think I need to tell you guys that. I'm forever coming out with little schemes and little projects, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I think that where I have been going wrong in the past, because I'm not too proud to admit the failures, is I get too wrapped up in the overall outcome that I forget to follow through with the short-term, achievable and realistically measured timeframes. So in the plight to basically become the best human being that I can in this lifetime, I've hit burnout way too many times for many different things. In my last job, I would burn out mentally, emotionally. There's only so much you can take when you're working with people one-on-one. And in that job, I was very, I don't want to say underqualified, but I guess just unaware of how bad the toll of vicarious trauma is, and being exposed to high risk, high need individuals who had been through so much trauma in their lives without me realizing how much trauma I'd been through. It's a shock to me that I lasted as long as I did in that field without actually taking the time off that I needed with burnout. So I would strongly encourage you all to recognize the signs of burnout too. I'm going to be talking about it a lot, but I just realized you guys probably some of you may not know what the phrase actually means. So it doesn't actually mean you to the point where you're in hospital, you can't walk, you can't talk, you're paralyzed, like you've literally used all of your possible physical means to make something happen. It's actually not as hectic as that. You don't end up in a coma because of burnout, but you do end up struggling with functioning and performing your daily tasks. Burnout can affect you in multiple different ways. The first time I experienced burnout in a professional capacity, I also experienced a bad anxiety disorder. And I got to the point where every time my alarm would go off in the morning, I would just have a huge panic attack. And I'd be grappling with myself on like, how do I leave the house today? And that was centered around my expectations of being the main breadwinner in the family, in the household. So I had to have that job. I had to go to that job, even though I was mentally exhausted, physically exhausted, and experiencing a wealth of symptoms. Like by the time I would finish my shift, even if it was only 6 hours, but especially if it was 10 to 12, you're just not recovering. You go home, you may sleep for 10 hours, it's still not enough. To recover from burnout, you do need an extended period of time to reset, to recharge. And ideally, you want to do that frequently to minimize burnout symptoms. So when I'm talking about burnout, it can manifest differently in everyone, but I have just quickly Googled some common symptoms, and I'll explain what I personally found occurred with me. So according to the World Health Organization, burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress. It's interesting that they use conceptualize because it does differ between different people based on how you can handle the workload. So someone next to you could be working the exact same shifts, be given the exact same tasks, and they're not experiencing burnout. But you as an individual, because of your upbringing, because of your previous experience or lack of, could be actually struggling to cope and experiencing severe burnout. So it is something that influences your mental health quite significantly. Sorry, my eye is leaking. But it does also take a physical toll on your vessel. So ultimately, it is categorized by 3 dimensions: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. I would literally sleep for 12 hours a day on my weekends and still not be able to recover. Increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism and cynicism related to one's job. I could not say one positive thing about the work that I was doing the first time I experienced hectic burnout in a professional workplace. And it wasn't bad, but it created a vortex of, I hate this job, I hate this company, I hate what I do, I hate the customers. And on top of that, with the increased mental distance from one's job, I isolated myself as well from my fellow colleagues, and I made it seem like it was a me versus them thing, especially if they enjoyed the work that we were doing. And the last characteristic is reduced professional efficacy. I was definitely on high survival mode. I was not the best employee, although I am very high functioning. I can perform tasks to a good quality or to a good standard, but I wasn't their model employee by no means. And there were definitely signs of me being burnt out, that I could not put myself as well together as I did at the beginning of the shift or at the beginning of the job. Towards the end, I could barely brush my hair. I could barely slap a face together, let alone do the elaborate makeups styles that I was doing at the beginning. So it manifests differently, but it is very, very common. And outside of the workplace, you can also experience burnout in your daily life. If you are someone who has found yourself in a position where you have many responsibilities, where you are responsible not just for yourself, but for other people, for other things, where you have a chronic list of things to do, where you have accidentally misinterpreted expectations of timings over the completion of a task, especially if you are neurodivergent and you experience ADHD. Maybe you're also experiencing burnout symptoms due to the fact that you just can't stay on top of the tasks that you set at hand. So what I really wanted to kind of pitch to you as a community, this is where I've kind of centered myself, and this is the message that Spirit wanted to kind of put out into the collective at the moment. I think as a collective, times are interesting post-COVID, if I can say post-COVID, because we don't really know if COVID is over. It feels like a memory, it feels like a dream, people are still getting it. But in Australia, we live a weird dystopian life in which COVID feels like more of a memory rather than a present situation. I think that the main focus right now for many of us is just trying to catch up on the things that we couldn't do during those periods of time. And by doing that, we are putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to get shit done and to experience as much as we can, to tick as many boxes as we can. And I think because of that, the main focus for me personally is long-term success, managing short-term burnout. If you need to take a break, take a break. And that is a strong message that Spirit wanted to give to the collective in general. This idea of recognizing when you are feeling depleted, exhausted, and not necessarily pushing through with that I have to attitude. Take a break if you need to. So I think that a lot of that is centered around a concept that I've talked about a lot on this podcast, a lot. I don't know if you've heard this from somebody else as well. It's a very common concept. It's called using SMART goals with specific timing. Be very specific, be measurable, make it achievable, be realistic, and be timely. Using SMART goals, that's a strategy that I actually learned in sales. Ironically, they really wanted us to be ambitious and they wanted us to believe that we could have anything we wanted because they believed that high energy people sell more. So they would feed us all these incredible concepts that will stick to me for the rest of my life. So grateful for that, even though I suck at sales. And I use that on this channel too, because it's one of the most practical resources or skills that I can give you outside of the hoodoo voodoo. Being smart with your goals is what separates a dream from an outcome. And that's something that I think will also help mitigate burnout feelings. If you're someone that struggles with burnout, and if you're someone that struggles to recover from feelings of exhaustion due to a high amount of pressure that you constantly feed yourself, setting SMART goals could be the way to do it. So I'm going to go over it again. A SMART goal is a specific goal that is measurable in terms of there is a finish line. You're not just pushing yourself to the next thing because you want to be able to celebrate. So it's a measurable goal, it's achievable, it's realistic, and it is also timely. You've given yourself a deadline to be able to achieve that success. On top of that, outside of those things, outside of being realistic and looking at the outcome and finding short-term steps to get to that destined outcome, there are also other physical limitations, like the fact that you are a living human being who goes through things. And for this part, I do want to share some personal experiences that may also explain why last year was not the best year for the Hermit Tarot. If you had been very active on my channel last year between September to, I would even say January, you would have noticed that I hardly posted compared to what I was posting at the beginning of the year. I definitely struggled to keep up with the workload that I had set for myself in the year before. I was able to previously put out a brand new video every week, sometimes twice a week, and I would also be able to offer extended readings on every video once a week at least. I had to take a step back and start focusing on other areas of my life because I physically did not have the energy to sit here and film podcast episodes and film readings because I'm a human being and I was going through so much loss in my personal life. And those are things that can't be measured in terms of recovery. Those are things that are outside of our realm of control. And for someone like me who loves control, I love to be able to understand and fully have like a rundown, a clear expectation of how something is going to go, what's expected of me, and how quickly I can finish whatever it is, whether it's a task, whether it's a situation, an event, a relationship, whatever it is. I like to know everything and be very clear from the beginning. So when you're dealing with something elusive and almost immeasurable like grief and loss, it's so hard to understand how your body is going to respond, because if you're someone like me who's lost multiple people close to you, you can't relate the first instance to the second. It's something so unique and special, and sometimes my most profound moments of grief just happen to be with people that I wasn't close to during their end of days, but it coincided with other events in my life that made me miss them so much more than the other person who I'd spent most of my life with. So I think that constantly checking in with yourself and constantly giving yourself allowances to be human and to feel and to have to reset and to have to take time off is going to give you more grace during those periods, especially if you're someone like me who has a lot of heavy expectations on yourself. I didn't want this to be more of a lecture or anything, but I do feel like after going through a lot of those periods, I was putting certain clues up on my stories on Instagram, and I was realizing that, wow, a lot of you are going through the same things. I don't know what it was about the end of 2022, but there was a lot of tragedy mixed in with some bittersweet success. And if you're in a similar boat, it feels so bizarre being able to continue on to the next stage without the people who saw you from the beginning, if that makes sense. So I think that as a collective, this is something that's contributing to setbacks or temporary redirections or feelings of, in general, not being able to get as far ahead as you thought you could in the time frame that you had, especially if you're dealing with long-term plans. Say you've been at it for 2 years now and you're still no further ahead. Well, you can't measure that based on previous 2-year periods because so much has happened as a world, as a society, and then on an individual level as well. I think it's good just to be subjective sometimes and to stop comparing yourself even to older versions of yourself, because we have experienced so much in the last 2 years that our younger selves and our older, sort of arguably wiser role models have not been through before. So I did want to share some strategies that I personally use to help me cope with these heavy feelings of I need to do more and why am I not as far ahead, and overall being quite an ambitious person and wanting more for myself and for my loved ones. When things don't work out as planned, it always for me comes back to the simple yet intricate art of surrendering. And surrendering is an ongoing process. It's easy to say, surrender, please, just let it go, just let it be. But the main way that you feel your way through that process and decipher what could be working or not working for you is by measuring the level of resistance you're being given. Measuring the level of resistance. Say you are manifesting a dream car. I will always use this as a scenario. Say you're manifesting a dream car, and the level of resistance in the beginning is that you're going to have to get a loan because you don't have enough money saved. You can't buy your dream car outright. So that's not a lot of resistance. Getting a loan is a pretty achievable challenge that a lot of people experience, and maybe even a financial planner could say that's a good thing. Don't pay for anything out of your own pocket, always borrow someone else's money. So you go to get a loan, and then you're met with another roadblock of resistance. This time, you don't have the best credit history to get the loan that you want. There are other loans available, but say they're higher rates, it's getting riskier, suddenly the resistance is increasing. You're thinking to yourself, well, how much more do I put into this? You know what can I do to get my credit history on track? And maybe it's a very straightforward solution. Maybe they say to you, well, hey, actually, one of your accounts is in the negatives. Can you pay that off? And you also have an electric bill that you haven't paid off. Can you pay that off? We need to see at least a month of you putting, a significant amount of money aside, or it might even just be $50 outside of a $1,000 paycheck every fortnight aside for the next month, and that could improve your credit check. If you start to feel like even through that resistance, you're being given opportunities, then you are very much still in the space of accountability and not surrendering. You're still needing to step up and ask, what can I do? How can I overcome this? And if you're being given opportunities by asking that, then you're still in the accountability stage of manifestation. And you're still in the accountability stage of goal setting. The one time when you should be surrendering is when there's physically and literally nothing else that you can do. Then that's when you have to recheck and go, why do I want this so badly? Why can't I have this at all? What is the universe trying to show me? If you believe in surrendering, you know that the whole concept behind surrendering is another concept known as pivoting, which I don't know if I'm the only one that uses this. I don't know if other people use it as well, but pivoting is when there's so many roadblocks around you, there's so many no, turn around, not this way, no through roads, that you literally can't progress forward. Although you stubbornly and egoistically want that outcome for yourself because you wrote it down on paper and you said, this is what I'm gonna do. If you are being met with dead ends everywhere you turn, that is the universe's way of trying to redirect you to a different outcome that is arguably better, but more aligned with the overall goal. It doesn't mean you can't have what you want. It just means that you can't get it the way that you want. And we have to trust the process in that sense, because we don't always know why things work out the way that they do, but we do know that we can always have what we want if we're open to how we get there. So that is why when it comes to this whole idea of burning out and exhaustion and pushing yourself to the point where you're meeting so much resistance, you have to surrender. When do I be accountable? When do I let go? It is all about eventually getting to your desired outcome. And I firmly believe, as someone who is ambitious and spiritual, that you can have the things that you want. I just think that it's about flexibility. And this idea of pivoting could be the helpful tool that you need, because I've used it so many times, to be able to look at the bigger picture and not always get so tunnel visioned with your ambition. It's always good to stay locked in on the outcome, but sometimes we're so focused on going through that specific tunnel that we don't realize there's a whole highway up here that we could be using as well. So I don't know if there's anything else I can really explain about pivoting, but I will say that the one instances that I've personally found pivoting difficult is when I'm more inclined to crave instant gratification. Say the road that we want for our success is the faster road, is the road that gets us to the outcome tomorrow or in 3 months, not 3 years. Say the outcome we want may be pushing us to getting 3 jobs to pay off the tuition, but we can be a doctor in 5 years instead of 8. That idea of instant gratification instantly changes our ability to pivot, because it does force us or entice us. Let's say that nothing really forces us, but it does entice us to want something in terms that are instantly gratifying for our physical needs. So I personally experience this on the daily. I am a firm believer of work smarter, not harder. I'm a firm believer of if something is too difficult, it's just not meant to be the way. And I've had that proven to me many times, with the odd exception of long-term success is the way to go. Now, I think that as a society and as a younger generation too, that has so much instantly gratifying media at our fingertips, we can take it too far. Instead of working smarter, not harder, we're literally just expecting the results to happen like that with little to no effort. And for me personally, it's when I get trapped in a loophole of chasing dopamine hits. I'm someone who's very susceptible to those micro dopamine hits that I get from Things like Instagram, things like Reels, things like Shorts on YouTube, things like quick, fleeting interactions with people that temporarily boost the way that I see myself and feel about myself. Those instantly gratifying little dopamine hits that you can get in 60 seconds or less really do accidentally set me up for unrealistic expectations over other goals that I'm trying to achieve and how easy they can be. So I feel like this is where we need to get back onto that train, or if I can even call it a train, let's get back onto the scales and go, well, how much is accountability versus surrendering? I think that as a society, with the amount of instant gratification that we receive from things like social media, we have to be able to separate ourselves from that lens and from that world, because it is a completely different world where everyone just puts their best face forward. Everyone puts their best version of reality forward, whatever that subjectively means to you. And we don't always share the darker sides of the process, or the more realistically long, drawn out, painful sides of the process. So part of my coping strategy when I am meeting resistance, or when I am finding it hard to be this fully fledged functioning adult and measuring up to my expectations, getting to the goals that I want post-COVID, is disconnecting from social media and trying to observe how much instantly gratifying behavior I'm feeding into myself in an unhealthy way. Another form of a healthier instantly gratifying behavior is going for a walk. As basic as that sounds, our parents would have told us that when we were kids. Going for a walk has much more of a grounding effect for me personally as a coping strategy than lying in bed and scrolling on TikTok for 30 seconds or for 30 minutes, let's say 30 minutes, because even you would have been there too. But for me personally, if I'm lying in bed at 11 a.m. scrolling on Instagram, I know that I'm not going to feel better afterwards. I'm going to have to cut myself off and be like, okay, now you got to physically withdraw from all of that content that you were just sponging into yourself for the last 2 hours, and now you have to spend twice as much time discharging all of that energy so that you can fall asleep. It sounds so basic, and I can't believe that we have to have conversations about why nature is important, but in a society where social media is so heavily intertwined in every daily action, we do forget that a simple walk or stargazing before bed or looking at the moon without feeling the need to always take photos of it and sharing it and making it so digitalized can be such a beautiful way of grounding yourself after a busy day or after an intense afternoon or meeting or shift at work, instead of connecting back into the dopamine train and trying to find those instantly gratifying dopamine hits and ultimately self-sabotaging our long-term plans, because that's what ends up happening to me. If I got to wake up at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning and I'm scrolling on Instagram at 11 p.m., I'm not going to be able to wake up feeling my best at 6 a.m. So I think that a huge coping strategy for me in the last 8 months of needing to recharge after intense burnout has been connecting back in nature and starting with, again, SMART goals in how I do that. It's not realistic for me to always be able to go on long, extravagant mountain climbing bushwalks. It's just not something that I could physically do every day, and it's not something that I can allocate in my daily schedule either. But it is realistic for me to be able to put aside a quick 10 to 30 minute walk a day if I can, and to be able to put aside an opportunity to connect with the night sky, because I find that so peaceful, and I know I'm not the only one. We love looking at the stars, and it's something that you wouldn't think is a dopamine hit until you actually get the chance to do it, and then you're like, wow, 10 minutes of this and I could literally see myself falling asleep now. So finding ways that work with you, because those are my ways of grounding and getting those feel-good vibes without it needing to be accidentally on the dopamine train, the instantly gratifying dopamine train. Other examples of working with nature can be having mindful showers, which I have shared on Instagram before. The idea of having a mindful shower is visualizing your stress, your anxiousness, your pain, if you're someone who's had a day in which your body is really buckling under the pressures of your tasks, washing away with every drop of water that falls over you. And it only really works when you're having a shower as well. You don't really want to do that when you're having a bath, because then you're visualizing yourself just marinating in all of that stress and anxiety. But having a mindful shower and literally imagining or visualizing, if you're not good at visualizing, saying to yourself, I'm washing the stress away, I'm washing the anxiety away. It's one thing to think it, but to actually visualize it or say it out loud, very healing. And I do that without soap, and then I do it with soap. And once the soap is off, I'm clean, I'm de-stressed, and I'm ready for whatever the heck I need to do afterwards from a more balanced place. So these are little short-term, arguably daily strategies that you can do to help minimize long-term burnout and to just help you from feeling guilty for dipping into those instantly gratifying behaviors. Another instantly gratifying behavior could be an unhealthy coping mechanism, like numbing yourself with substances that can help you dissociate from the exhaustion that you're feeling. But they do actively contribute to the long-term exhaustion. Your body needs time to recover from substances, whether that's just alcohol or something more. And by using that as a form of stress relief, well, I don't think I need to say that. I'm not exactly a health professional, but we've talked about it before. I'm someone who, I have to be very careful about what I use because I have an addictive personality. You know within yourself that this is something that is only going to accrue in terms of the exhaustion levels, even though it's a temporary way of discharging or even disconnecting from the busy, active, crazy life that you're leading. It ultimately catches up to you. Maybe not in the morning after, but at the end of the week when you're supposed to be refreshed and ready for your weekend, and you feel like you need another weekend after your weekend, it all catches up to you. So never discount how vital it is just to be able to recharge and discharge in nature. Another thing as well is sun worshipping. I don't know if you guys have ever done that. I haven't. I tried to do it once, but I actually hate the heat, so it didn't really work with me. But a lot of people who practice yoga and meditation like to also practice sun worshipping. There's a whole other cultish sort of side to it where people take it too far. Obviously, public exposure is a crime. So please, before you take your clothes off, consider that there could be people around you and you want to be careful about that. But the idea of sun worshipping is recharging in the sun's rays and using the sunrise or the sunset and that beautiful glow you get from the light as an opportunity to physically recharge your vessel. And I don't know about you, but I love being able to just lay out in the sun at the right times because I do feel like it is calming me, it's soothing me, it's recharging me. But you just want to do it safely as well. Like I said, I'm not a health professional. It's up to you where you're at with sunscreen, but skin cancer is real too. That is another side of being able to recharge and discharge that I've been shown recently. It didn't work for me, but it might work for you. And how it interlocks with yoga is a lot of yoga's practices is about mindfulness with your breathing, with your vessel, with your movements, with your thought processing. Meditation and yoga go hand in hand. You throw sun worshipping in there and you're recharging your vessel while you're mindfully moving through each of the poses and through each of the breathing techniques. So it can be a very beautiful way to start your day by putting you in that mindset of mindfulness and gratitude as well. And it can be a beautiful way to wind up a busy day by putting yourself in mindfulness and that state of gratitude. Working with the sun or worshipping the sun is ultimately seeing it as our life source in many ways, in the way that it dictates our day, it dictates our night, it gives us the opportunity to eat, to see, to feel. Don't take it too far, look into it yourself, and it could be something that's helpful. I just wanted to throw that in before we move forward. Now, the other side of coping, because coping is the idea that you're not doing well and you need a strategy to kind of help you get back either on the original plan or schedule that you had for yourself, or trying to find a flexible way of getting back into the long-term plan. But outside of coping, I did also talk about accountability. and accountability coming hand in hand with surrendering. Now, for me, I am someone who has been very relaxed with myself in the last 8 months. I've literally just given myself so many allowances, and I've said, calm down. This is going to change for each and every one of you, but I am definitely a high-functioning overachiever, and I do need to be able to just sit down, sit back, and go, you're doing too much. So the ways that I stay accountable is I have to mentally and sometimes physically with lists separate my responsibilities from my expectations. My responsibilities are things that I have to do. I have to feed my animals because I'm responsible for them. They can't feed themselves. I have to feed myself because I'm responsible for me. Nobody else can feed me. I have to pay my bills because I need a place to live. The things that need to be done fall under responsibilities. The things that I want to do, because that could be fun or interesting or a part of my own individual plans that don't fall under the responsibilities radar, go under expectations. And initially, I made so many of my expectations responsibilities. I told myself, no, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this. I had to the point where I was way too overloaded in tasks. It was obvious to me after visualizing it and putting it down on a physical piece of paper why I was getting burnt out so frequently, why I was constantly having to recover from burnout, especially in this job, if you can call it a job. I feel very privileged. It was suddenly, I should say, very obvious why I kept getting burnout, because I had way too many responsibilities, and not all of them were actually responsibilities. A lot of them were just expectations that I wanted for myself, things that I had told myself I needed when actually they weren't clearly working for me. They were things that I should have been more flexible with. So now I literally categorize even little things like my appearance under expectations. As long as I'm healthy, as long as I'm in a position in which I feel like the best version of myself is being represented, I don't need to do certain things. I don't need to spend 3 hours getting ready for the day or the night. I don't need to have the newest pants or the best shoes all the time. I don't need to do this to myself to the point where my expectations are literally being pit against me. It ends up feeling like you're fighting a losing battle as well. When you have that many expectations, when you start to actually line out your expectations, you start to realize, oh wow, like maybe I should be a bit more kind to myself. So staying accountable is about being realistic again and understanding that there are certain things that you do need to be a bit more flexible with. In saying that, another thing that I did want to talk about is on the other side of expectations, accountability is also about knowing why processes didn't work out the way that they could have, and stepping up into that active reflection mode to be able to realize where you have dropped the ball and why certain things did not work out the way that they should have. Being accountable is sometimes about just having a quiet moment to reflect and to understand, oh, okay, so that was on me. Not so that you can, crucify yourself with guilt and shame, but so that you can learn through the process more about yourself and more about what you want through that failure. I don't know about you, but sometimes when something doesn't work out the way that I want, it actually steers me into a direction of maybe it wasn't something that I needed to begin with. Maybe it didn't work out because it wasn't meant to work out, and maybe I don't even want that anymore. I was just so attached to seeing this plan through. Our society breeds into us through our early experiences in schooling and the other structures that we cling to, especially if you're someone who was a sports kid. It's very much see something through and follow it through, and you have to start something and finish it. But life doesn't work out that way. In nature, so many things pivot and so many things are surrendered, not because they didn't try hard enough, but because they had to adapt, they had to evolve. They couldn't just start something and finish it. That mentality is also frugal. It implies that if you don't see something through, you're going to be lacking and you're going to miss out. And if you miss out, then you're never going to know. It never feeds into the curiosity of, well, what if it didn't work out for a reason because something better is out there? And what if the destination is not always the prize. I think a huge part of this falls back into understanding why you set these plans in the first place as well. And for me, a lot of my ambitions and my success comes from me wanting to evolve and be better, and ensuring that through my own beliefs and values, the next in line, the next generation, the younger people who do look up to me don't have to go through the same things that I had to go through. And when I connect back to that deep core value, I realize that it doesn't matter if I'm driving a Porsche. It doesn't matter if I'm in my house by tomorrow, as long as I ultimately show them and show myself that I can be successful in the process. And I've realized too that a big part of my success is letting others be involved in the process because of my core beliefs. If it's so important to me that I'm not struggling anymore, and that I'm showing the younger people that you don't have to struggle anymore, then why not involve them in the process? Why not be more transparent about the struggles? And I recently had this discussion with another younger sibling as well, because they would constantly, well, we were just having a conversation and they were constantly comparing themselves to me. And I was like, you don't realize, actually, when I went through that, it took me 10 goes to actually get to that point, or it took me so many steps of failure and defeat to get to that point. And I guess because you were younger, or because I was too proud to show the defeat, all you saw was the victory, the success. And that kind of idea gets translated a million times over on social media. So it all kind of intertwines in terms of those horrible miscalculated expectations versus pivoting and working with reality. Because working with reality isn't about admitting defeat. It's more about understanding the flexibility of your mindset, and how when your comparison in terms of your point of reference and who you are comparing yourself to, your experiences to, your success to, your outcomes to, should be flexible. You can't base all of that on one thing, because no two things are the same. But anyway, that's a whole other story. Maybe we should talk about that another time. But anyway, so this really helps bring me in to my next point. I wanted to talk about measuring your success individually instead of through external expectations, whether those external expectations are that of a parent, a mentor, a teacher, a guide, whoever it is that you're working with. There comes a point where you have to be able to separate yourself from your peers, or from your superiors, or even people who you are responsible for, to be able to identify at the very least your own needs, as well as your own trajectory. And I want to use the word trajectory, because, if I can say it, because the idea of a trajectory is being able to look at the scope of what could be. It's not about binding you to a specific way of moving forward. It's more about looking at a horizon and going like, wow, I could go all the way over there, or I could go all the way over here. Or based on my current horizon, I could go ding, 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 all the way over there through a very zigzagged effect. Knowing what you need can kind of help eliminate those basic responsibilities that we talked about earlier, so then you can start to understand what you should be expecting from yourself, from your own success, from your own outcomes. Without getting too complicated, let's just focus on the idea of success again. Because we are in a post-COVID era, we're all trying to catch up on our goals, we're all trying to get ahead, we're all trying to be the best versions that we can be without having to feel restricted. I think a lot of us are feeling extra curious about things we wouldn't have even considered had we not been so restricted. So let's say your horizon, you have the chance to look at it as an individual, and you're able to see everything as far as your eye can see. You're able to make a very detailed idea, or at least a very basic plan based on a very passionate idea of how you want to move forward. Let's say your passion is connected to your desire to travel and your desire to gain more as an individual. And the way that you would pivot off that is by maybe gravitating more towards things that you do feel more passionate about. Those things become tainted when we start to experience external interference over expectations. Let's say you have a parent who goes, well, why would you leave now? Like, I only have a few more years left on this earth and I really need you to be here. Or maybe they say, why would you do this to yourself now? You're nearly 30 or you're nearly 40 and it's time to start thinking about settling down. Those are all external expectations of other people projecting what they want onto you. And those things, in terms of our metaphor of you looking at a horizon and being able to see the trajectory, all of those external expectations start to create shadows. These shadows form doubts, and those doubts start to block us from being able to see our full trajectory, our full horizon. So we do need to consider how, or I guess what, the external expectations are and how they are shadowing our horizon. Sometimes they're very passive. Sometimes it's the love of your life saying like, hey, I don't really know if I'm ready for you to move overseas. And those are things that can be dealt with in a very open, loving forum of communication, identifying the fact that we care about each other and you care about me so much that you're afraid of losing me. But we do also need to understand that that is creating shadows of doubt on our horizon, on our trajectory. And these external expectations can really stem from anywhere. For me, I have to consider all of the animals that I'm responsible for before I even think about leaving the house. So all of those little creatures instantly create shadows of doubt on my trajectory, let alone the amount of beautiful human beings I have in my family. So my horizon all of a sudden has to become very clear in terms of, okay, so this is an obvious responsibility, this is an external responsibility. These are external expectations that I can remove from my horizon. If your values are that you adore your parents or you adore your teacher or you adore that person and you really value what they think, then maybe their expectations will be more of a constant. They'll be more of a boulder that sits in front of your horizon rather than just a shadow of doubt from external expectations that you can remove. But I do think that a big part of measuring your ability for success and staying accountable and giving yourself periods of grace when you do start to experience burnout is about understanding how external expectations are all contributing to that. Because when you feed energy into those external expectations, you're reducing energy that can flow into your overall plan, which is ultimately creating a vacuum of you just giving into one thing without getting anything back or without getting that same energy back to put into the momentum of your plan. And if we look at energy, it would literally be like putting all of this here and then diverting some over there and only a little bit being left in this way. So that is ultimately going to cause setbacks as well. Being aware of how external expectations could be limiting your growth for success can be very helpful in going, oh, okay, well, maybe I should be a bit kinder to myself because I am dealing with a lot lately. These are all just little things that I think are helpful to take note of, because the overall vibe that I got when I pulled the cards for this reading, as I spoke about in the intro, was that we're being way too hard on ourselves. And that's something that I can very heavily relate to. Constantly being way too hard on myself to the point where I'm not looking at my life realistically and looking at everything that I have got going on realistically. So whether it's the pivoting that is helpful for you or the coping mechanisms or just being able to separate realistic expectations from the distorted lens that social media projects and instantly gratifying rituals kind of project, it is important that you treat yourself like a human being as you try to achieve in the next 2 years, 2 months, 2 days, in the rest of this lifetime. We are experiencing things that those before us have not been through. And it doesn't mean that we can't be successful. I'm a firm believer in manifestation because it has literally given me things in this lifetime that I could not have even dreamt of as a kid. Although I did visualize it. That's a part of manifestation. But I didn't think it was going to actually be real. And I believe that a big part of manifestation for me is working with the fact that you're human and the fact that you do need to understand how these little things are impacting your ability to succeed. And it's not always bad. That's the thing that I did want to just summarize as well. Looking up to people and putting weight to what they say is a sign of, at times, a very healthy relationship. Valuing their opinion, valuing what they see of you and what they expect of you is the signs of a very healthy relationship. It's just something to be aware of too when you start to plan your own path forward and when you start to try to separate yourself as an individual, being able to put those there in your trajectory as a keep in mind, please. If this doesn't move forward, it's because your energy is split. It's because you have somebody that you really care about in life whose expectations of your achievements do matter. It's because you have these responsibilities, and it's because you have been sucked into this vortex of instantly gratifying dopamine hits that make you feel shit, if I can say that on YouTube, for not being able to be as successful as you should be, because this person's life in 2 seconds looks instantly better than yours in 24 hours. So I hope this was a helpful podcast, and just being able to talk about things that I'm sure you've realized. These are conversations that I've been having with people for the last 8 months, just trying to feel better about myself and giving myself more grace for needing time out and for needing to have strategies to cope when technically I didn't think I had been through much at all. I didn't think that losing that many people was that big of a deal because I'd been through it before. I didn't think that COVID was a big deal because the whole world had been through it together. And I didn't think that buying a house or trying to have ambitions in general were that big of a deal because so many other people do as well. I think centering yourself and reminding yourself that you are experiencing arguably a different reality at the same time as the person next to you experiencing a different reality in the same, it's so bizarre. Anyway, that's a whole other story. That's a whole other story. We're going on tangents now. But anyway, I hope this podcast was helpful in just kind of voicing this idea of expectations and realities and burnouts and staying back on track, because I firmly believe as a collective, this generation is onto bigger and better things. And I hope you feel better informed or better equipped in skills, resources, tools, little things that you can utilize so that you do recover from burnout fast if you are experiencing it, and so that you do give yourself allowances when you do need to recover in general. This was an interesting conversation, even though it was just me talking. If you do want to add to the conversation, be sure to comment on whatever social media platform you're watching this on. I would be very grateful to hear what you thought about today's episode, and whether you want to add your 2 cents or whether you want to suggest a topic in the next episode. You can submit a feedback form on my website, and we'll be sure to at least read it, but at the most include it in the next episode, or be able to reply to you individually as well. So thank you so much for joining me in today's episode of Spirit Talks. Remember to not get tunnel vision to the point where you don't pivot to something better. I wish you abundant success, and I hope to connect with you in another video. Bye.